Blessings, everybody. This is Dale. Thank you so much for joining with me today on the Word Podcast. We're continuing through Psalm 118, and I believe we got up to, verse 12, I think is where we stopped, but I'm going to back up a little bit, start at verse 10 again. Now, this is the psalmist. We're not told who the psalmist is, and he starts off by saying, give thanks to the Lord. Why? Because the Lord is good, and because his loving kindness is everlasting. And he starts reminding them of some things. And like in verse 8, 9, he said, it's better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in man. Verse 9, it is better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in princes. So he says that in 8 and in 9. A repetitive thing, but it's better to take refuge in the Lord, folks, than to trust in the ways of man or trust in princes, the powers of man. Then verse 10, all nations surrounded me. In the name of the Lord, I will surely cut them off. Now, he's about to declare that 3 times, that in the name of the Lord, I will surely cut them off. That repetition is really important. It's important to drive home the point, obviously. Probably important from the point of view of how this psalm was communicated, whether it was in just a poetic type of thing or in a song type of thing. But notice what was going on. The psalmist says that all nations had surrounded him. Okay, might be a bit of a hint that it may be David writing this, right? But he says, in the name of the Lord, I will cut them off. Then verse 11, they surrounded me. Yes, they surrounded me. In the name of the Lord, I will surely cut them off. Okay, so he's declaring what has happened to him. Okay, and he's declaring that in the name of the Lord that he was going to cut them off. Verse 12, they surrounded me like bees. They were extinguished as a fire of thorns. In the name of the Lord, I will surely cut them off. So he's letting us know that this is what his situation was, and this is what the circumstance was, but that he had victory in the name of the Lord. They were extinguished as a fire of thorns. I'd mentioned in the previous episode that surrounded like bees. I always get a chuckle out of that because I actually had that happen one time. I was about, I think I was 15 years old, 15 or 16. And I was working for this farmer. And he worked a lot of land. He rented a lot of land from people. And one of the things that he did was bale hay for folks. And so that's what I did. I went out and I cut and raked and baled hay for the public. And he sent me out to this field one day. And this field had not been cut in years, probably. I mean, it was really overgrown. It was really thick. It was going to produce a lot of hay bales. That was good. But what a nightmare. And so I'd made a couple of rounds, and I was using a particular kind of newfangled machine. And the machine was great, but this stuff was so thick that it was clogging. It was breaking blades. I was having to replace those. That's always an hour a shot, you know. So anyway, I'm going along, and I got off the tractor, and I got off in a way that normally you're not supposed to get off, okay? And when I did, I'm just walking through this thick grass. I should have got on the other side what I already cut, but I got off on the side that I hadn't cut yet. And all of a sudden, I thought I was in thorns. And I thought, what in the world's going on? And I heard all this noise, and it's like I was getting pricked with stuff. I had stepped right on top of a nest of ground bees. They were irritated. Man, I took off running, doing the bee dance. You ever seen anybody doing the bee dance? Well, when you are being swarmed by hundreds of bees, you're just going to do a bee dance. I mean, you're going to, the Hebrew word is churl. You're going to twist and jump and leap and run. And I did. Man, I ran all the way up this mountain to get away from those things. And I probably ran, I don't know, it was probably a good eighth of a mile and maybe a quarter of a mile before they let me alone. And then I just collapsed on the side of the hill. I'm laughing because I thought, oh, man. I looked and I thought, man, I got stung a good bit here. And, you know, it hurt, but it wasn't like the end of the world. So I remember it being like 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I let them calm down, backed up, and started baling hay again. I mean, started cutting the hay. I was just cutting it. Well, my boss shows up. And of course, I thought he was so old. He was 24 years old, you know. And I told him, I said, man, there's a ground bee's nest all over around here. He said, well, I was afraid of that. turns out he made more money killing the bees nest than he did baling the hay. He went out to the guy and said, hey, because he had 2-3 dozen of these things. Well, later that day, I get done, and I get home that night. It was probably 9 or 10 o'clock at night, which was not unusual in the summer. I mean, you work late. And I just remember I was so tired, and I walked and just laid down on the floor in the kitchen, my mom and dad's floor, and it was linoleum. It was cool. It just felt good. And I was just laying there. I was just so tired. And I thought my mom was acting sort of weird, but I didn't know what's going on. It wasn't her that was acting weird. I was the one that was acting weird. And I'm just laying there, and she's trying to talk to me, and I wasn't being very responsive. And she thought, what's going on? Finally, she got it out of me. She said, was everything okay? Something happened to them. I went, yeah, I got stung a couple of times. Well, all of a sudden, they're throwing me in the car, and they take me to the hospital. And this was no small drive. I mean, it wasn't that far, but it was 20, 30 minutes. I get there. I remember freezing to death because, they put you in those rooms like that. And they come in there, and they were counting how many times I'd got stung. And somewhere after 60 times, they just quit counting how many times there were. And so basically, they just wanted to watch me. But they gave me some of this new miracle drug that was prescription then. I'd never heard of it. It was called Benadryl. You ever heard of Benadryl? Yeah, but back then it was prescription. It wasn't over the counter. You can get it over the counter now. And so they, gave me some of that and sent me home. Now, if I get stung by a ground bee right now, I'm not even going to swell. I've got so much of that stuff in me. Nothing's going to happen. Excuse me. I'm laughing at myself here. But this whole being surrounded by bees, I know what the psalmist was talking about. Can you envision his situation and his circumstance? That he's so surrounded by the enemy, he doesn't know what to do. But you know what? In the name of the Lord, he's going to cut him off. And that's what he did. Now, the psalmist continues, verse 13. You pushed me violently so that I was fallen, but the Lord helped me. So he's talking about the nations that had pushed him. And remember in the previous psalm, he had talked about let all the nations praise the Lord. Now he's saying, hey, nations, you pushed me. You did this. Okay, you did it violently so that I was fallen down. Literally, that he fell is what it means. But the Lord helped me. Verse 14. The Lord is my strength and song, and he has become my salvation. So the psalmist is showing us that even in the midst of these things, this is what he's learned, that the Lord is the strength of his heart. The Lord is his strength and his song, and that the Lord is his salvation. So what should the response be? Verse 15, the sound of joyful shouting and salvation is in the tents of the righteous. The right hand of the Lord does valiantly. Verse 16, the right hand of the Lord is exalted. The right hand of the Lord does valiantly. Verse 17, I will not die, but live and tell of the works of the Lord. Folks, that's what we're called to do. We're called to tell of the works of the Lord. Every person who is a true believer has a work of the Lord, and that is the salvation of the Most High God. And we are to tell it, and we're to proclaim it. So often people say, well, I don't know, I'm not a preacher, I'm not a teacher. I'm not talking about that. No. What I'm talking about is just proclaiming to those that you know, your friends, your family, your enemies, your coworkers, whoever it may be, as the Lord gives opportunity, just what the Lord has done in your life and what he is doing. Tell of the works of the Lord. It may be a goofy little story about bees. Okay. I think the Lord saved me that day from all those bees. But tell of it. It may be that you were surrounded by the nations. Tell of the works of the Lord and understand this, that you're not going to die. You're going to live. Our time in these bodies will come to a point, okay? But we will live forever. Well, again, I'm Dale. Thank you, and I'll see you next episode. Goodbye.